Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. It's a nice summer afternoon and today we're going to complete this little project we started some time ago. In part 1 we removed all the guts of the house and we sculpted the beginnings of a tree, making sure that the house can open because we're also going to be working on the inside of it. We did some planning, which is very rare for this channel, and finally sculpted the parts in Blender. But instead of 3D printing them, I actually was able to machine them with the Carvera Air. And here is the result of the first iteration of this video, where we ended up with parts for the extension of the house. Now, this was just the beginning, because we are now going to redo the entire house, so it looks more like a herbalist hut, which was the hut, H-U-T. I know I can't say it right, which was the original idea I had when I saw this little set. The material you see is called epoxy tooling board, which is really cool. And as you can see, I made a mistake with the proportions of these pieces, so I'm going to redo them first. Basically, I'm going to make all the elements in the structure a little bigger, add more space between them, and kind of match the original kit, because I went way too hard on the details. I started sculpting things that would have never been able to be carved or kind of seen without a microscope. I don't know what 5 centimeters is apparently. The good thing, or the great thing about this material, is that you can actually like file or sand a lot of it. It's like a mixture between balsa wood and, well, epoxy, I guess, or like a harder plastic type of thing. So it feels very strong, but also you can like carve it too. Really interesting. I got it from the official Makera website. I think I already mentioned this. For the next step, luckily John helped me. We used the Carvera controller to design the tooling, and then we tooled it. Started work. We used, John actually designed a 3-step process, or we used 2 different bits in 3 steps. So one for the general shape, the second for the detail, and the third to cut out the shapes. We did some vacuuming in between the bits, but mostly because it feels amazing. And John designed it in a way that made it very easy to work with, keeping the parts in the board. You will see what I mean, as we are now going to start building the house. Extensions. Now, this doesn't mean I'm not going to use the parts that we first machined. I am going to use absolutely everything, because I've been saving all sorts of bits and bobs, and these do have some interesting texture. But here is the comparison with the new design and the new board. And this is where you can really see what the machine can do, because the detail is really nice. I'm very glad I added some depth, although I did go a little too far with some of the depth, like between the bricks. But we're learning. Mandatory visit from one of the 2 supervisors. This is Patty, and then we're going to have Tommy also walking around. They're constantly walking around.
Can I open this with you here?
It is their house.
Oh,
and they are very cute. So after a while I went back to do this. We need to remove the parts from the container. The thickness of the board was a little different from the one that came with the machine, so it was a little less straightforward, but still a lot of fun. And like I said, working with this material was really satisfying. So the next step is to remove all the extras and rebuild the extensions and then add them to the house. And now we have quite a few steps ahead, and I'm having a bit of a strange day feelings wise, so I was wondering, should I just play some music? But you generally say that you don't mind my rambling, so I would suggest the following. If you don't mind my rambling, you can keep listening to this, and if not, I won't get offended if you play some music or mute me or anything you want. Now, usually when I do a pony restoration or a pony custom, I have a lot to talk about because I can either tell you about the pony or I can tell you about my ideas behind the custom. In this case, I am not really sure what the original toy was, this toy. One option I pondered was telling you about one of my special interests, Tolkien and Middle Earth. For some reason, also in my mind, herbalism and alchemy I kind of mix up, so I thought we can talk about alchemy. And then when I was wondering why are these 2 things mixed up in my head if they are completely different, and then I remembered the Voynich Manuscript. And this is something that I find really interesting. I know lots of other people do too, because it's a big mystery. So yeah, what do you think if I tell you about the big mystery of the Voynich Manuscript? And I also get up to date with whether there is something new about it, because I haven't checked in a while. So what is the Voynich Manuscript? If I had to use 2 words, it is an undeciphered text. If I had to use more words, I am making this video. Wow, that was the dorkiest laugh ever, but I'm gonna leave it because it's an expression of, let's say, special interest, joy. Because when I woke up this morning and I started recording, I didn't know that I was going to be talking about this, and now I am super excited. So let me tell you a little bit first, in my own words, sort of what this was when I discovered it. I think I came across possibly a very early YouTube video where someone was claiming that they had deciphered this very old text from the 15th century, so around the Renaissance, possibly Italian. We'll talk about that. And this video was, saying that they had deciphered it. But if you haven't heard about this, I don't want to give you too many spoilers. So I'm going to start with some of the, with the discovery of the manuscript and some of the earlier theories and the later theories and the mysteries that remain. All right, let's first describe this script, this book. So it has 240 pages. It has lots of very, very beautiful illustrations, usually showing like people or plants or also astrological symbols. And it was, kind of rediscovered by a dealer, a Polish book dealer, in 1912. And the only information they had about this manuscript was that it had belonged to a person called George Varish, who was an alchemist from Prague, now Czechia. Hence, the mix-up in my head, I think, about herbalism and alchemy, and this book in particular. By the way, the images you will see across this video are from the digital library of Yale University, because they published the entire manuscript in 2020. Now, I mentioned there are 240 pages, although it's believed there were more pages that got lost, and people have been able to identify from very early on the number of words because they are separated. There are 38,000 words. Lots of them repeat. 9,000 of those are unique. I am describing the things you can kind of see now. Then we're going to go into all the different theories and the different tests that were carried on the manuscript as they became available, like carbon dating and things like that. But yeah, just from the beginning, this looks like a real language. This seems to work like a real language. There is no obvious punctuation, but there are characters that repeat. There is a flow, and there are also a few notes or a few words in the manuscript that are not in this script. For example, there are some Latin letters and a name, or some Latin annotations in some of the margins, and possibly the names of the months, for example, are written in Latin, where there is some diagrams, some astrological diagrams. Now, Latin is a very old language, and it has lots of different spellings or ways of writing things, and some of these notes are linked to some regions or time periods that are very mysterious too. For example, the page that I mentioned that has the names of the months, there are 10 of the months from March to December. They are written in Latin script, but the spelling is close to like Italy, Spain, France. Then there is another page that has different lines, like within the text, it has lines that seem to be Latin, but the letters are not exactly the same. They're like distorted letters. I actually find these notes even more or as interesting as the book itself. But let's go back to the script. So yeah, first observations, things people could see since the moment this was found in 1914. Yeah, this looks like a proper language that we don't understand. Is it a cipher? Is it encrypted? And if so, why? And what are actually, and this is where things get very, very, even more interesting, more mysterious. What are these graphics? What are they depicting? What are all these illustrations of flowers and plants? Are these real plants? What are the people doing weird things in the pages? On the pages, but I feel like they are in the book, in the pages of the book. Look at this section, for example. Plain text, but is this a recipe? Maybe? And to show you some of the people, this person here at the bottom of the page, or these people bathing under a serpent building. Here definitely bathing with some water and some maybe fruit. And these are the normal looking things. And you have plants, but then you have plants that don't really seem to have existed. And what is this? So I mentioned that this was an undeciphered text, maybe a cipher or an encrypted text, or the third or one of the many, but the third main hypothesis that people have considered was a hoax. Now, would you put that much detail in a hoax? I don't know. Depends who's paying for the book, right? But let's see what people considered when, thinking that maybe this entire book is nothing more than like a big, elaborate and very, very carefully crafted joke. Now, some people say that because it's so sophisticated, it can be a hoax. Other people have also said, well, there are lots of documents that are also very sophisticated and are hoaxes. For example, actually, let's bring an example from alchemy. You know, alchemy, one of the biggest goals of alchemy is to find a way to turn lead into gold, which can now be done by scientific methods, and it's very, very complicated, but it's not impossible, but it would have been, impossible at the time. But lots of alchemists tried to convince people that they had found this secret recipe. In the case of Duke Cosimo I of Florence in 1555, there was a trickster, an alchemist trickster, that created a new substance that was like a powder that looked like gold. So he pretended that he had created gold, and these were very, very elaborate, like hoaxes. And well, it's not a prank, it's a hoax, because there was a financial motive here. But this alchemist actually got the experiments and pretended to create gold in front of this duke, and the duke paid 20,000 ducats for the recipe. So quite an elaborate thing. Without falling into the pit of giving examples, because I have lots of like things I would love to research, but Victorian ghost tricks, seances, effects with lights and mirrors, and some very, very, very complex things. So is this too complicated to be a hoax? Not necessarily. There are ways to create a semi-random text that actually looks coherent, looks like it could be a language. There are like tables you can use to kind of do it. So maybe I will ask, okay, why? It could be a similar case to the gold and the alchemy and the duke. Maybe you want to sell this book to a very wealthy person, and it's a book of magic and alchemy, and it has rituals and knowledge. So I can see how that could be a possibility. So let's leave that on a side for a moment, and let's look at the other theories. The next one is a cipher. Basically a language, a real language, European most likely, obscured using some kind of letter substitution or group of letter substitution. Now, ciphers have been around for a very long time. It seems that the manuscript could be ciphered, so it hasn't been unproven, but it also hasn't proven, because nobody has, if it is encrypted, nobody has found the actual cipher or the actual answer. And now the third hypothesis, because it's very connected to the previous one, is the natural language possibility, basically that this is a real text in a real language. And this is where that video I mentioned that I came across some time ago was... what was I saying? This is where the video was. This is what the video was about, because there is a big hypothesis in 2014 that that it is a real language and you can decipher it translating nouns first. And there was a paper where there was a possible translation of 14 characters and 10 words that had been compared to other languages and to certain plants. Unfortunately, the author of this paper, Stephen Bucks, passed away in 2017, and nobody has picked up on it yet. There have some ideas about using deep learning, I think, to see. There are definitely identifications of some of the plants and animals in the script. Lots of them remain very, very mysterious. If you look at, for example, the Wikipedia, there are lots of other theories. It's really, really interesting if you want to deep dive into it. But an interesting approach is to see if the illustrations seem familiar, if it looks like were other painters, illustrators at the time that drew in that manner. And there is a candidate, he's called Giovanni Fontana, and his illustrations are quite similar. There is a discrepancy with the carbon dating there, but it's an interesting approach, I would say. Now, carbon dating, I mentioned. Let's talk about the techniques, the studies that were done to the manuscript since they have become available. Now, the University of Arizona in 2009 tested several parts of the manuscript with radiocarbon, which is great. You don't want to test just one part, because what if that page was added later or something? And the samples gave a date between 1404 and 1438, so very specific. Then they did some protein testing to see the material. The parchment was made of calf skin, prepared quite carefully, although not of the bestest quality in the world. And some folios were a little thicker. The covers were possibly added later. And a very interesting observation from medievalists is that the book has been heavily thumbed, or it has been handled a lot. So many believe that it was used routinely, as a manual maybe, or as an almanac, or it could be also a ceremonial use, but it was definitely very used and had lots of little wounds and insect bites and touches and all the annotations on the margins. And this is why I find it so interesting too, because we know nothing about this manuscript except for what we can kind of test for. We know nothing about its history, and there are all these clues that seem to indicate that this was a very important book, a very beloved or very reference book. Anyway, one more thing, the ink. They also tested the ink, basically contemporaneous to the pages, and the paint possibly later. So maybe the illustrations were line illustrations first and then they were painting. There is also a lot of retouching, all things that in my eyes seem to say not a hoax, because why would someone use the book as much, right? It could be a cipher, yes, but I don't think it could be a hoax. That's just my personal opinion. Another thing is that the handwriting seems very consistent. It doesn't look like, I don't know, it looks like someone that is used to writing in this style frequently, to me. So let's imagine now that this was actually a real book in a real language, ciphered or not, because it could have been in real language and kind of codified, but a real book, a real manual of some sort. Now, we didn't really talk about how the book is divided, the different sections, and because now we are kind of assuming that it's a real book, I think we can look into them and see, okay, what is this manual? What is this thing? What is it talking about? I'll briefly tell you the different sections of the book. So first, there is a herbal section, and it seems to be European herbs. I don't know if I should say herbs or herbs. I didn't learn, I don't know how I learned. Either way. Anyway, 126 pages of plants. Then we have the astronomical section, 17 pages. Lots of diagrams, astronomy over astrology. There seem to be the zodiac constellation with different figures. It doesn't seem, it seems a little more astrological than astronomical. Then we have the balneological section, which is mostly text with a few drawings here and there. And actually I had to look this up because I wasn't sure what it was. It is the science or study of therapeutic baths, mineral waters and spa treatments. So all those people that were bathing and being in water, that is from this section. Then we have the more mysterious section, the cosmological section, 14 pages, more circular diagrams, and this is how they're called, more obscure. There is that big fold out that I showed you before that is made of 6 pages and seems to be a map of islands connected in some way. There could be a volcano in there, there could be some castles, not sure. There is quite a nice castle, you can see it here. Then we have the pharmaceutical section, 16 pages, lots of roots, it seems, roots and leaves of plants, and some jars potentially, apothecary jars, some very exotic looking. And then the last section is recipes, possibly, apparently, and because it's lots of short paragraphs that I showed you, and there are some stars in the margin. So it looks like it could be recipes in my eyes. Most researchers agree that the manual, if it is a real text, seems to be kind of a medicine book. Some of the plants have been identified, like wild pansy and maidenhair fern. Lots of them are kind of mixes of different plants potentially, like the roots are one species and then the leaves are another species. Some of them, and I think this is a very strong theory, seem to have been copies of other illustrations where there were gaps of in the illustration, and then the person that drew them kind of made up the elements. But of course then you have the zodiac signs, the astronomical charts, or this sort of map with the spheres. And if it is a herbalist or a medicine, manual, it is very closely linked also to some belief, right? Now, this is not a rare thing. Like if we look, for example, even in ancient Greece, there were centers dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine, and they were usually near thermal springs or mineral water, and the pilgrims will come and do a spiritual cleansing. And herbs were also integrated into a lot of these water rituals. So like botany, medicine, divine magic, they were all part of the same healing process, right? So for me, this makes a lot of sense, although the example I'm giving you is from ancient Greek, old time ago. And this is probably Renaissance, but well, here are my theories. Now let's hear my theories. I should probably clarify why am I talking about this, because I find it really interesting. Do I have any scientific background? Yes, I studied anthropology and I did a master's in genetics, so not really anything to do with the Voynich Manuscript. Maybe, yeah, the anthropology part, yes, and this is what I want to bring into the conversation. I am not a practicing anthropologist. I'm just a very curious person, and I really enjoy processing lots of information and getting to doing a summary. And this is what I'm doing here. I'm not reading a script or anything like that. I'm just looking at things and learning things, reading and sharing. Think of it as a starting point, and if you find this interesting, then you can go to the original sources. I would suggest you start with the Wikipedia. It is a great resource. It has all of these things I've been talking about and lots of links to other resources. I thought I would actually read you something before I jump into my thoughts. Well, all of this is my thoughts, my more thoughts. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the first confirmed owner of the manuscript was Mr. Barish from Prague, and he called the book a sphinx that had been, quote, taking up space uselessly in his library for many years. That is what he told his friend Anastasius Kircher, who had published an Egyptian dictionary. He claimed to have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Barish wanted to learn more about his sphinx taking up space, so he had sent already 2 copies to Rome, to Kircher in Rome, asking for clues, because he might have some ideas about it. Now, Barish didn't want to send the actual book to Rome, he only sent a few pages, but after he died, the manuscript was passed to a friend of Barish called Jan Marek Marci, or Johannes Marcus Marci, who was the rector of Charles University in Prague, and Marci finally sent the book to Kircher, the actual book. And we have an original letter from 1639, I believe, that was still attached to the book when Voynich then bought it in 1914 or so. And this is the letter that he wrote. Reverend and distinguished Sir, Father in Christ, this book, bequeathed to me by an intimate friend, I destined for you, my very dear Anastasius, as soon as it came into my possession, for I was convinced that it could be read by no one except yourself. Whoa, that is a good intro to a letter. I want to receive a letter like that. Then it says, the former owner of this book asked your opinion by letter, copying and sending you a portion of the book from which he believed you would be able to read the remainder, but he at the time refused to send the book itself. To its deciphering he devoted unflagging toil, as is apparent from attempts of his which I send you herewith, and he relinquished hope only with his life. But his toil was not in vain, for such sphinxes as these obey no one but their master Kircher. Alright, Johannes, that's nice. Accept now this token, such as it is, and long overdue though it be, of my affection for you, and burst through its bars, if there are any, with your wonted success. So cool. He then mentions that he was told that the book used to belong to Emperor Rudolf, and that he believed the author was Roger Bacon, but, and I quote, on this point I suspend judgment. It is your place to define for us what view we should take thereon, to whose favour and kindness I unreservedly commit myself and remain, at the command of your reverence, Johannes Marcus Marci of Kronland, Prague, 19th of August, 1665, between brackets, or 1666. One of the things that the letter also mentioned was that, apart from the book belonging to Emperor Rudolf, was that he had paid 600 ducats, and so they went to the files, researchers, and they found that Rudolf had actually purchased a couple of remarkable rare books from Carl Wiedemann for 600 florins. Wiedemann was a collector of esoteric and alchemical manuscripts. and it's one of the people that researchers say maybe if it is a hoax, maybe he was the one that created it. And this gave me pause. And I'm sure maybe it gave you too, if anyone is listening to this, which I doubt. Because, okay, there is a monetary motive now. This book was sold as a very rare, very collectible example to a king. Now, what is 600 florins? Let me check. Okay, you can imagine, take your guess now. The answer is $50,000 to $85,000 today. Okay, I didn't know this. This makes me think again. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. But the book has been used. The book has thumbed, like imprints, and it was used. So, still not convinced. But more information is always good. Now, you know how we were talking about notes and later inscriptions? There is a very interesting inscription on the first page of the book. The first page. I think that's quite significant. The inscription says Jacobus Hortstiki de Tepenech. I don't know how to say any of those names, I'm so sorry. Let's say Tepenech. And he was the head of Emperor Rudolph's botanical gardens in Prague. So apparently, it is possible that when Rudolph died and he still owed money to lots of people, including Tepenech, that he might have taken the book in partial payment of that debt. And we know nothing about it for the next 200 years. So this was 1600, around 1600. So 200 years, nobody knows anything. It was probably in Rome, in in Kirchner's library, and which is now the Pontifical Gregorian University, by the way. And then when Emmanuel II of Italy captured Rome, he confiscated, or they confiscated, the government, many properties of the church, including the library of the Collegio Romano, where this was stored. Many of the books were transferred to the personal libraries of the faculty, and apparently some of the books went to private hands instead of like being confiscated. There was correspondence amongst those books that belonged to Kircher. So apparently, yeah, this is how the book ended up in the next pair of hands. A private library in Villa Mandragone, Frascati, near Rome. Then in 1903, the Society of Jesus needed money, so they decided to sold some of their things to the Vatican Library. This was in 1912. And Wilfrid Voynich acquired 30 of those manuscripts, among which was the famous Voynich Manuscript. And he also, I guess, got to name it, which is not bad. Now, from the letter I read dramatically, we know that Kircher and also a friend of him called Raphael Nikolsky, they thought that the book had been written by Roger Bacon. Now, why and who was Roger Bacon? He was a lot of things. He was a polymath, one of my favorite words. He was a philosopher, a scientist, a mathematician in a way, and he was I like this. I was reading about him just to like freshen up, and it said he was regarded as a wizard and particularly famed for the story of his mechanical or necromantic brazen head. And oh my god, I really want to like dive into this and learn more, because that sounds like kind of an automaton. Oh my god. But I'm not going to. Now, it is quite interesting that they thought it could belong to Roger Bacon. As far as we know, it doesn't. But Bacon was one of the first advocates of the scientific method, kind of as we know it today. So it would be really interesting if he was the author and he actually, I don't know, he's writing about... I don't know, it's an interesting question, right? Because would this have been seen as a very scientific text at the time, or the opposite? I don't know enough about Bacon to know this. If you do, please let me know. In any case, Bacon was much earlier, and according to carbon dating, we are talking about around 1400s. Bacon was 1200s. So yeah, not him, but very, very interesting hypothesis. One that would have justified 600 florins. Now, this person that I just mentioned, there is one more thing I wanted to say about the gardener. He was the gardener to Rudolf and also the imperial distiller. which is interesting. He was the curator of his botanical gardens and a personal physician. And also, you know how I said that his signature was in the first page of the book? It was actually not legible to like our naked eyes. It was only discovered with ultraviolet light. Imagine that moment when you take a look at one of the most mysterious books in the world and you find a signature that nobody had seen for a long time. That must have been incredible. And one last little thing, like a bit of tea about these. You know how Kircher claimed to have deciphered hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics. He was wrong, as it was later proven he hadn't. But he was definitely very interested in ciphers and deciphering, and he had been fooled by people before. I don't know, maybe it's like cryptographic people like to play tricks on each other, but yeah, he had received at least one letter asking for a translation. He supposedly solved it, but it was just a trick. So there are some theories that say that maybe the Voynich Manuscript was kind of a demonstration of a new type of cipher, and like it was being tested with Kircher. I don't know, but it's all very interesting, right? And lastly, there is one more kind of, I don't think it's a theory, it's a group of hypotheses that have to do with Mexico and the Aztecs. Yes, you heard that right. So let's just quickly talk about that, and then I will stop, I promise. So I was trying to find information about this, but it's a bit difficult because it's behind a paywall, like an academic paywall, but I was able to access some of the abstracts. And this is from a book called Unraveling the Voynich Codex. It's from 2018, or at least published in 2018, by Jules Yannick and Arthur Tucker. And one of the main things they say is that the difficulty in deciphering this manuscript is because there is a basic misinterpretation of its origin in both time and place. And what they are suggesting is to look into Mesoamerican languages, in particular languages from pre-conquest Mexico, like Aztecan and Nahuatl. And one of the first things I read that I thought was very interesting is that, well, already in 1944 there was a botanical taxonomist called Hugh O'Neill, and he said he had identified 2 species in the codex that were actually indigenous to colonial New Spain, or to America. These were sunflower and capsicum pepper. And in 2016, the authors of this book I am referring to now identified another 57 species that could be indigenous to colonial New Spain or circumboreal, which is, in all honesty, a broader area. If you look at the map, it has parts of like North America, parts of Asia, parts of Europe, the northern part. So yeah, not exclusively Mexican, I would say. So that's on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there was analysis comparing the language of the script with some pre-conquest languages, and there was some affinity with Nahuatl, but as the paper says, or as the book says, it was difficult to find evidence of a constructed language. And this is where we will drop this little thing. I will leave all the links if you want to take a look. This is super interesting, but I also wanted to, end with some thoughts about how I see this whole thing, or why I find it so interesting. And one of the theories that resonated the most with me since I learned about this manuscript was that of a lost language and potentially a lost group of people, right? And this is something that might seem quite strange for the time, because we are talking about Renaissance, that's not that long ago, but it's not that uncommon in like the the entire history of humanity, so to say. And actually we only have to look at the Aztecs to see that their language was, in a way, or the written language was lost after the conquest. It is not completely lost. There are codices and we are able to read the writing, but it took a long time. There wasn't like a native dictionary you could use. And because of how the conquest happened and either destroying the civilization or converting it to, let's say, a different religion, the people that could read it was no longer there, or their kids didn't really have the full knowledge. And like I said, this is something that has happened a lot, and one of the main things I keep going back to in my head about this is the Bronze Age collapse, which is something I could spend days talking about, but to make it very short, around 1100 BC there was kind of Some have called it an end of civilization event, a very severe collapse, like a perfect storm that made a whole entire chain of very, very like complex societies to I don't want to say collapse, but drastically change. Many of them migrated, many of them disappeared in a way. And there are so many examples. Have you heard, for example, of the Carthaginians? Carthago was a city that was entirely destroyed, like every single, I don't know, leaf of grass was destroyed. That was in 146 BC. And the language also started to die out because people had to, migrate and switch to Latin mostly. And this is something that keeps happening in a way, even today, because of cultural assimilation or changes in society. To give you a much more modern example, and obviously not to this degree that I am hypothesizing that the manuscript suffer, but my family, about 4 generations ago, they all migrated from Italy to Argentina to they were given lands and animals and tools, but one of the conditions was you can have access to all of this, but you have to like become Argentinian in a way. You have to learn Spanish, you won't be allowed to speak Italian anymore, and you have to like follow the rules of the country, like mandatory education, like lots of things that came with relocating to the country, and being assimilated in a very kind of systematic or strict way. This was in 1860, and I could see it in my family how the ones that had grown up in Italy would speak Italian and write in Italian, and then the kids that had been born there but grown up in Argentina will speak Spanish but with an Italian accent, and then the descendants will not speak Italian at all. So why am I saying all of this? Because I feel that all of us, we tend to think of language as kind of a permanent thing, like something that, it changes, but it changes very slowly. But if we look at history, there are events, just like in biology, that would completely wipe out groups of people, that will completely change how a group functions. And then you can also add to that the fact that someone can invent something and then not be able to give it to someone else. For example, and I think I talked about this in one of my other videos, I don't know which one, about the Antikythera mechanism, which was a little kind of computerish machine thingy that was able to predict eclipses. Well, not predict them like magically, but to calculate future eclipses. And it was found at the bottom of the ocean or at the bottom of a sea, and it was thousands of years old. And there is really no continuity with that kind of technology. It got lost in a way, just like all those books got lost in the burning of the Library of Alexandria, which still, and will always feel like one of the biggest tragedies in human history at like a cultural level. I don't want to be insensitive and say, this is the worst thing that ever happened. No, but this was, again, a combination of seemingly very random factors that resulted in us losing so much knowledge, just so much knowledge. And I feel, and this is my conclusion, I guess, that the manuscript could be an example of something like this. Maybe not exactly like the other things I talked about, but something, in that area. We are so used to books and movies having all the characters presented and all the hypotheses like right there, so you can kind of deduce what might happen, but that is not how things usually work. So when I think about this, what I picture personally is something like maybe someone traveled to America, to Mesoamerica after the conquest or during the conquest. They either had some sort of shorthand, or they belonged to a small community that had a specific language, and they were writing down things they were seeing, things they were being told. Maybe this person felt that the language they were hearing, like Nahuatl, for example, deserved its own new unique alphabet. So maybe this person traveled to Mesoamerica, maybe they couldn't go back, or maybe they went back and they gave the book to someone. And then communication was somehow lost and nobody could decide. Maybe the book actually came with a guide, like a translation guide, and it just didn't make it together. It got separated. And I don't think there is anything wrong to go deeper into any of these hypotheses, because these are things that have happened to humans and will continue to happen. And each of these possibilities is actually a really interesting story on its own. I don't know, imagine if we lost all of our books and then someone found fragments of Tolkien's Elvish language texts, and how confusing that would be, right? Or let's say Klingon, but I really wanted to bring Tolkien back. So we are approaching the end. I haven't talked about anything that I have been doing on the video. But just to close my idea, I would say that whether the manuscript was a real text, a coded text, a hoax, stories are important. Well, what a conclusion. Well, for some reason I always go back to we tell each other stories, and that's what makes us human, and that's cool. Anyway, let's look at the results. But please let me know what you think about this, and if you're still listening. Anyway, this is the before of the house, or snowy cottage, and this is the after for this part. I know I didn't do the inside of the house, but I thought maybe we can do that in the part 3, and I can talk about, I don't know, give me ideas. Or tell me to stop. So yeah, I added lots of grass effects, tried to do some painting. I have never painted like miniatures or anything like that yet, so I'm very bad at this, but I try to experiment with washes and highlights, and this is what I was able to achieve, which in a way contradicts what I was saying about the Voynich Manuscript potentially not being from Europe, because this looks like a European house. But let's say that the person that wrote it traveled to America, then came back and finished the book in this little house. So regardless, thank you so much for watching. If you're new here, I'm sorry, and thank you especially to the patrons that allow me to do these things and talk about all the things I want to talk about. Thank you so much. I am eternally grateful, and I hope you have a nice week, and I will see you very soon for the next video, which is going to be a sea pony that I'm working on. So again, thank you so much. Have a great week. See you very soon. Bye bye.